open meeting of the West Newbury Select Board, open session on October 25th at 7 o'clock p.m. And thanks for coming, everybody. Oh, sure. Thank you. So this meeting is being broadcast on local cable TV and recorded for rebroadcast on local cable. If somebody is watching on cable and can hear this now and wants to come in on the Zoom meeting, the dial-in phone number is 646-558-8656. And whether you're coming in on the dial-in or coming in through the internet, the meeting ID is 891-5962-3951 with a passcode of 768231. See, so there's trick-or-treating this Sunday, October 31st from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. There's information on the town website with what's called safe practices for trick-or-treating. And so if somebody wanted to sort of understand, what's considered safe protocol here in town this year, that'd be a good place to go. As always, we have a call for volunteers for a number of committees, including the Finance Committee, the Conservation Commission, and the Climate Change Resiliency Committee. I'd like to say thank you to everybody who came to town meeting on Saturday. It was a good turnout. We met our 90-person quorum and were able to get all the town's business done. That was an issue of significant concern beforehand. So it was great that that everybody turned out. And I think probably most of the people that are sitting here are included in that group. So thanks. I guess the last announcement is that anybody who would like to be kept up to date through emails on town news and announcements can go to the town website and subscribe from there. So our regular business tonight is a discussion of Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Building and where do we go from here? Everybody here undoubtedly is pretty well aware of the history to date of looking at renovating and significant renovation of the building. There was a process where there was a committee trying to figure out what to do with the building. Came up with a tentative plan, went to town meeting, went through CPA first, the CPA first, who agreed to support it. An article went to town meeting 2 years ago, which was voted affirmatively by a very slim margin, and then we went into the process of getting a contract with a designer, and the designer going through their process and came back with a set of plans to have quoted on. Those were put out for bids, and we got 2 bids that exceeded by better than 50%, maybe 60% of the budgeted amount based on town meeting vote, and so we can't go there now with the amount of money that we budgeted. So the question is, what do we do now? Does anybody want to add anything to that?
No. I think that's a great summary, Rick.
Okay, so I guess for starters, I'd like to hear from. We have received a number of correspondences from residents in town. There's probably at least a dozen, maybe as many as 15, if we were to look back over the course of the last couple of months, from different people with different perspectives and different ideas. This is the opportunity for people here tonight, both in person and online, to speak up and let us know what your thoughts are. So if anybody would like to speak up.
Rick, why don't we discuss what the designer had suggested?
Sure.
First.
Okay, so do you want to run through that background?
Well, so the architect, after the bids came in a few weeks ago and gave us some scenarios of what her thoughts were after seeing the much higher bids than were anticipated. And, in a nutshell, one of them was to redesign with some redesign to stabilize the outside structure of the building and essentially not make it my sense was that it was going to be redo the tower, redo the roof, so there's no water damage, the outside would look good. But I would like to ask what other people thought when they read it, the idea that the inside would not really be usable, wasn't that what it seemed like?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So-
think the first one was to kind of mothball it and wait for prices to come.
Right, but one of them was to spend approximately $850,000, including a new design, rebid, and just have the outside, a shell that looks good, the tower is redone, the bricks are repointed, some work on the windows, and so to make it watertight, and then in the future, make the inside a viable facility. And so there would be an additional design cost, and we don't know whether that 850 is what the bid would be. Another, as Wendy said, another option would be to put things in abeyance and just wait until the construction, the demand for construction and materials costs and the workload of contractors maybe diminishes and maybe things would be cheaper. But again, that's not a very guaranteed solution. We don't know, would that be in a year, would it be in 5 years? There's no way to know. So that, I don't know whether that's a great, so that's my personal thinking. I don't know if that's a great idea. Another solution would be to simply leave the building as is, and the town puts restrictions on it in terms of preservation, and to have a outside private individual use it, maintain the facade, and with the stipulations that the town would create, and we rent the building out in that fashion. And what was the fourth one?
Or sell it.
Or sell it outright, yeah, and that would take, as it's a town property, I don't know how easy that would be. Angus, you have any comments on that? We have to get, obviously, town meeting permission, but would it have to go like as a we couldn't necessarily sell it to the people it would probably have to be bid, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And obviously, there are huge hurdles for anybody who wants to do that, because it's zoned currently for,
Residential.
it's in a residential zone, but it's a substandard lot size. And there's maybe no capacity to put in a typical sanitary disposal system. Yes, there are all sorts of hurdles associated with that being sold to a private entity. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but significant hurdles.
So these were the ideas. Someone who has experience with these kinds of facilities and does this kind of work for a living. So that's the reason I wanted to hear it.
And we do have the architects on, so I don't know if you want to see if Archie's summary was complete on that, or
Okay.
if Lynn and Doug Manley are both on.
Oh, yeah, okay, great. Would Doug or Lynn, would either of you like to add to that?
Sure, since I'm the one that put this memo together with Doug, I'll say that, Archie, I think you captured the main points that I was making in the four points that I raised in the memo. I will say that there are past precedents that I can point to for municipalities either selling a property with preservation restrictions or leasing a property with preservation restrictions and going through a public procurement process to do that. So, you know, I did that memo with these models in mind. As to the zoning issue, I hear your point. That's a different kind of thing. You know, it would be a matter of considering changing the zoning for that particular parcel. That'd be spot zoning, and nobody loves that, but it's not, again, without precedent. And the second thing is that if an educational institution or a religious institution were to bid on the property and succeed, they would be able to change the use under the, I believe, I'm not a lawyer, but they would be able to live under what's called the Dover Amendment, which allows religious and educational institutions to exist in non-conforming zoning by the right of their mission. So just something to think about. I know these are complicated scenarios that we've put forth, but we think that they're worthy of discussion.
I'm interested in hearing ideas from people who are in attendance, you know, from the public that's in attendance. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
So for those here in the room, there is a microphone. It will pick up people in the front row. But if you're further, you don't need to get right up to it, but just stand within 5 or 6 feet of the microphone right next to the podium, and the microphone will pick you up just fine. For those who are participating remotely, you could just either turn on your camera or just take off your mic and just speak up, and Rick will try to, you know, take people in the order that they express interest.
Yeah, and please identify yourself, you know, if you do choose to speak.
I'll start. Or just questions, whatever. One question,
Kevin.
I'm sorry, Kevin Bowman, Maple Street. One question I have is about the cost of mothball, because, you know, mothballing, because we don't know what we want to do yet, or I don't think ever the market's gonna settle down that we can get a 1.2 million out of it. But how much, do we know how much that costs? What does that entail?
Yeah, the question is, how do we, when we say mothballing, do we do anything? Do we leave it as is?
Yeah, $200,000? No, or is it?
And do we heat it?
Here we go, Lynn.
Yeah, go ahead. Please.
Yeah. So this is Lynn Spencer speaking again. Doug and I reviewed the bids, because I'll remind the public that this falls under Chapter 149 bidding. So there were, you know, seven filed for bids as part of this. But we reviewed the bids, and we actually then came up with $850,000 to address the building envelope and the structural work based on that actual bidding material received.
But that was the second option. I think the question is on the first option in your memo, just the mothballing.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was a little bit hard for me to hear the question.
Sure.
So for the mothballing, you know, quite honestly, you've already invested in some amount of structural and building envelope work. There probably would be a little bit more to do on the turret. Wouldn't you agree, Doug? On the roofing?
Yeah, I mean, someone, the speaker just threw out the figure, what is it, 200,000? I would think 200,000 would take you a good ways towards getting it tightened up for mothballing at this point.
Sorry, I did hear the question, so sorry about that.
And if it was mothballed, the building would probably need to continue to be heated in the winter, in order to prevent further, degradation because of temperature swings.
Yes, I mean, I think that the damage has pretty much already been done there. I mean, the kind of temperature swings that would be affecting things like plaster are kind of past due. I mean, I think you could potentially turn the heat off and the utilities and let it ride. Because like I said, the plaster damage has already occurred.
I didn't catch that.
Plaster damage.
Plaster damage has already occurred. I guess I was under the impression that the bricks continue to degrade, if the building wasn't heated, but that could be wrong. Yeah, Brian.
Hi, Brian Klein, Maple Street. I am so torn about this building, being in the renovating business. Has the architect explored the option, and this may sound weird, but of tearing it down and rebuilding it to the exact specifications? And would that cost more money or less?
Lynn, did that question come through to you?
Yes, it did.
Yes, yes, it
Okay,
did.
great.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I think that would end up being a much more costly way to go forward. I mean, you've already got most of the building shell there at the moment, and to replicate that, I think I don't see an economy of rebuilding it versus repairing what's there.
So to the point, we are reconstructing, our plans reconstructed the turret. That is beyond reclamation. But the main block of the building, the gable roof section, actually is remarkably intact. The masonry is all retrievable. We could completely repoint it, or it could actually exist for a few years with its current mortar condition, with a couple of exceptions because of, for instance, the removal of the fire escape on the rear elevation, has created some unsightly and damaged masonry. But the roof is intact. It's a beautiful slate roof that is performing. Where the windows are actually in, again, very retrievable condition. We had said at one point, if this was a private project, the North Bennett Street School would be very enthusiastic about restoring the windows as part of their teaching exercise. It's possible that Essex Technical School might be interested in a window restoration project to teach people. But there's a lot in this building that is in very retrievable condition. It is also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And while that primarily is a form of recognition, in fact, it's nearly exclusively a form of recognition, unless there was federal funds involved, and then it would kick into what's called a Section 106 review. This may be too much information, but it's to say that there are standards under the Mass Historical Commission and the Secretary and the Department of the Interior that sort of guide treatment of historic buildings. We use them in our design work. It's called the Secretary of the Interior Standards. So it is not, in our estimation, cost effective to start over. It's, in our estimation, cost effective to preserve and reuse.
Yeah.
Tom's on.
There's a mic here. My name is Bruce Down from Middle Street. I'd just like to, and I haven't been very keeping up a lot with the whole situation, but I did read some of the material that was sent out, read the letter from the architect, and I just wondered if, I'd like to get a better understanding of how much work went into drilling down into the cost estimates that were received, or the cost quotes that were received, and really seeing if there are places that we could work to push back on. I know they said some of the cost increase was due to COVID, although I'm not sure exactly how that affects things. Some was due to materials, I get that. Some was due to this subbidding process. I don't know if those are things that can be challenged at all. And maybe, you know, a reduction in the cost estimate by 50% is just a bridge too far, but I'd like to know what was done to see if, how reasonable those costs were, because it was over by 100%. That's a lot.
Close to it, yeah.
So,
Okay, well, I guess, to get any real answer to that, that's probably a question for Lynn again, unless Wayne, I don't know if you weigh in on that?
So, from the beginning of the design, we pretty much started with value engineering, because we didn't really have a lot of money to spend, and we didn't want to ask for $4 million. So, Lynn, I don't want to speak for everyone, for you guys, but I think we pretty much value engineered. We tried to reuse some of the areas for the replastering. We used existing beams. We were going to fill the basement with concrete, so we didn't have to worry about building the basement up. We found a cost-effective way to do the septic tank. So from the beginning, we were trying to design it with money in mind. We weren't going crazy with fixtures that had gold trim on them, with brass doors. So I think from the beginning, we knew we were going to be really close with this. And then as we were designing, the process was going on, we realized the construction cost was increasing in the back of our So we try to keep it within reason without going crazy, thinking we had this blank check to write. So I just went from the beginning, we were designing based on, like, we didn't have enough money to do it, and we're gonna cut it short. When the bids came in high, obviously I opened the plan up. It's like, oh, what can we take out that's extra? There's no extra. We didn't add a third floor on. We didn't add a fancy HVAC system on. We have a basic system that heats. We didn't, make a glass staircase. We didn't put brand new crazy windows in. We're gonna redo the windows we had there. So there's really, I don't know where you would cut, but it's definitely not 50%. Maybe you were able to save $30,000 or $50,000. I'd say, but that's not even a drop in this. So I just want you to know, being deeply involved with the design from the beginning, it felt like we were value engineering it from the start. And that's what usually you start high and you guide the project down. We went the other way. So.
Lynn or Doug, do you want to elaborate on that, as well as perhaps speak to the process that was followed with Mary Bolso?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something about it. The original question asked how much we looked at the numbers after they came in. And actually, with a Chapter 149 public bid process, unfortunately, you take the low bidder. And in this case, we had two bidders. I guess in hindsight, you'd like to have had more competition and more bidders. But unfortunately, when we have to take the low bidder, we haven't thought about doing any further negotiation or redoing it. If it were to go out to bid again, we would certainly take another hard look see if there are anything. I agree with Wayne. I don't think there's a lot of fluff in this project. There wasn't, we weren't extravagant with any of the things we did. We brought pretty much a basic restoration to the building.
There's one thing that I would like to add here is that, in a way, the size of this building it kind of works against economy of scale when you're doing work on it. So I just want to remind everyone that this is a 2,400 square foot building. And I know you'll then say, wow, that makes these numbers even harder. But the fact is that we saw HVAC numbers double from what had been in our estimates. And our estimates had been provided by working with contractors and looking at the sort of bidding history that we had 2 years ago. There's just been significant increases in cost, especially related to HVAC or electrical, anything practically involving metals. But COVID has had an effect on especially the HVAC market, that's for sure. And you've all heard about supply chain issues. Well, that's a factor here. I mean, what Doug is saying is that in a way we are locked in to what Chapter 149 bidding is all about, which is a whole other discussion. But that's we can't go in and start negotiating with a contractor until, you know, until award is made, and you can't, and even then you're sort of limited. So I know that that's not a very satisfactory response, but that is the situation. Chapter 149, quite honestly, while it's designed to sort of make it a wide playing field, ends up being a complicated thing for a general contractor to administer with subcontractors they are assigned, not necessarily know. And so there's a cost of administration and management that gets added into these contracts. And we have a relatively small building to work with.
Does anybody else have?
Sorry. Elias Knights of Stewart Street. I have a question regarding.
So what was your name?
Elias Knights of Stewart Street.
Okay.
I have a question. You brought up the third and fourth options there, either the ownership of the property and reletting or the sale of the property. And both of those seem to assume that the property will stay as is. What if the option was given to essentially either sell or relet the property, but the developer can do with it as they so choose, thereby eliminating the cost to have to stick with this solid property. They could build it to their needs and perhaps actually generate greater revenue for the town because the buyer pool increases that they don't have to take on all these costs of actually fixing the building. They can build it to suit whatever needs they have, subject to whatever restrictions balance.
So I guess I'm not sure I follow you. It sounds like what you're suggesting is actually take down the existing building and build something completely different.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Just increase the buyer pool, and if you take away from the builder's obligation to have to do all the work that we described here,
Yeah.
you know, potentially that becomes more of a valuable asset to a buyer and really a great source of revenue for the town.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm qualified to fully respond to that, but it's, I think the problem that we're going to run into in that situation like that is that it is less than a quarter of an acre lot, substandard sizing residential lot, and there is probably not space on the lot to put a conventional sewage treatment system. And not only is it undersized, but it's also not adequate frontage based on the zoning, the underlying zoning area for residential lots. So those are, in that case, because although the zoning would be the same, I think, I don't know how that works. I'm not the land planner, but it's totally different. It's currently zoned for residential, but it's not a residential structure that's on it. But if you now thought you could put a residential structure on it, you probably need to meet the underlying zoning. If you thought you wanted to try to do something else that was, say, commercial, then it would need to be rezoned. And as Lynn mentioned earlier, spot zoning, which doesn't mean you can't spot zone. It's generally avoided, I think, for a variety of reasons, if it can be. So thanks, for the thought. I mean, that's something to think about. And personally, I see the downside to that is that you then have, it is currently memorial, and you would essentially write off that value, any memorialization of veterans that it was originally dedicated to.
No, that's fair, that's a fair point. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a memorial that's
Yeah.
A question on the septic though, because the septic, or whatever this building say, it gets approved for this 2 million plus. There'll at least some sort of septic system there, so.
Yeah, there was gonna be, the plan as presented so far was for a, what's called a tight tank. So it was gonna be a tank that had to pump periodically based on usage. Because the usage of the building was, or the usage of the building would have been relatively light, that was judged to be an acceptable, not an ideal, but an acceptable way to deal with it. From a standpoint of an actual residence, that becomes a lot less attractive and less practical.
Right.
But thanks.
One option that's kind of that still retains the memorial perspective, but demolishes the building, was brought up by a few people that sent in letters to take the building and create a memorial, like a park. So that's another thought that the architects didn't raise, but that has been expressed by some residents.
And that would not generate revenue, but it would be much lower cost than what we've contemplated so far.
We're not necessarily trying to generate revenue.
Right, exactly. No, I was just sort of answering that point. So, Carol, I think you know that.
Yes.
I'm Rick Jacobson. Back to when you were saying that the building is, I mean, everyone loves talking about that building and that building.
Hey, I'm sorry, Lynn, can you hear the current speaker? It's just you're a little further away, and I just want to make sure that everybody can hear.
What you were saying, is there a way we can keep the facade, get rid of the back or something? Maybe spend $500,000 or something to keep it as a memorial for ourselves in the town? I mean, in reality, even if we fix that place up, no one's gonna use it. I mean, it's not gonna be used a lot. Be nice if we had, if we could find a way to save it, and make it reasonably, money-wise, that everyone would, it would work, and keep the, fix up the facade, maybe keep the turret, whatever we can, to get rid of the back part. Maybe, I mean, is that a way, we wouldn't need HVAC, we wouldn't, just have it like more of a memorial.
What happens with demolishing the building or demoing some section of it and keeping kind of the vestige of a ruin or whatever, is it basically takes it out of the National Register recognition. So there's a process that we'd have to go through to do that. That we review with Mass Historical Commission, and possibly it would sort of kick down to Washington and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. I won't say it's impossible. It's usually when this kind of thing is done, it's when there's already been some kind of catastrophe with the building and you're left with some part of it, and then you're kind of holding on to some element as a memorial, versus the deliberate, demolition of a portion of the building. In fact, the portion of the building that you'd be taking down, in fact, is probably the most useful and retrievable at this point. I hesitate to say it, but the turret is the part of the building that is the most challenged. If you were to imagine it, you could imagine, and Doug, I can just feel your hands on my throat as I say this, but you could imagine documenting the turret, taking it down, and at least holding the main part of the building and saying, well, maybe in the future, some angel will come and we'll be able to rebuild that turret. The cost of that turret, by the way, the reconstruction of it was around $400,000, just to give you a relative sense of things in terms of the bids that were received. For myself, I will tell you, I am standing in a building, you can see the tin ceiling, in a building that was slated for demolition in my town 20 years ago. It's a 3-story, turn of the century brick school building. And the historical commission, when the town voted to sell it and a developer had purchased it, it was going to be torn down and built 2 houses. The historical commission shook off the the gray shoulders and went to work. And this building is now, continues to be owned by the town, but it was actually through a public procurement process was leased to a nonprofit that was formed to redevelop it. That nonprofit has now done 2 other buildings in this town. The buildings are owned by the town, but leased to the nonprofit, which gives a lot more flexibility when it comes to these kinds of rehab projects. And I can point to the town of Lexington, which has just entered the second 100-year lease on a historic building, the Buckman Tavern, the second 100-year lease with the local historical society, or the Canton in Canton with the Tilden House, which has also leased town-owned property to a nonprofit to develop, to rehab and take care of. So that's one model. That's why I said, option 3 here, vote to sell with the preservation restriction, is one way of preserving this building. But I realize that it takes, imagination and effort on the part of a local entity to do it.
Lynn, question, so on those buildings that you mentioned, my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong about this, is that if CPA funds are used, that we cannot then lease the building for commercial application?
No, that's,
Is that incorrect?
no. It's as long, in our town, I live in Nahant, our life-saving station had probably, I don't know, $800,000 worth of CPA funding. And we lease some part of it to the American Legion, interestingly enough. But the second floor is leased as commercial office space. And that's all within
I think we just had an answer to the question here, Lynn. I think it was because it's going to be bonded. I believe that's what.
That is the difference. And Angus was very clear in pointing that out to me when I did my first draft on this memo. But if you were not using bond money from CPA, then I think you've got a different scenario.
So my name is Josie Dow. I live on Middle Street. I've been in town for 29 years. We are a military family. I'd be interested to know what these other ideas that people have sent in, because I look at it from a whole different perspective, and I am coming into this relatively naive on what's possible, what's not possible. Septic issues have been a problem for that building, and of course I was in with Donnie Fowler and things like that when we have the Thanksgiving fundraiser and that for the sports programs. I look at that as for the town to retain it, I think it's a waste of money, especially obviously at over $2 million, because we do have other town facilities. I mean, it's what this town needs is a meeting place of I look at it as a town-owned or privately owned cafe, or if to get around, it can be nonprofit. I look at with the military, we have an organization that does coffee, one morning a week that's free for vets that come in. You could have, it would be town servicing townspeople out of like a cafe. And if, you can have the upstairs that you can, if you need an education type, I could hear an education type of school facility going in there to skirt around legal issues. You can have it sublet to, an organization that holds classes there, even for town classes, upstairs or downstairs or whatever. Has anybody looked at like what they do with lighthouses? They need, the Coast Guard still has rights to the lighthouses, and they're sold for a minimum fee with the expectation that the new owner has to be liable for all the restorations, right? And they own it. It'd be something like that, selling it to, someone, not a developer, but, somebody that is going to do something right for the town, not for a new Dunkin' Donuts can go in there or something like that, but something that's privately run that is gonna give back to the town of different activities that's taking place there. So it's a win-win. You're restoring the building at someone else's cost. You'd have to do maybe some rezoning, and that the whole idea is that the town would work with that individual to make it friendly for the town. I'd be interested to hear what these other ideas that came in were. So, you know, organizing and doing a nonprofit, not a big deal, you know, subletting it for classes to be held and skirt around issues, not a big deal. I think retaining the building for what it was meant to be for the town is important. I think at over $2 million, because of the restrictions that the town has, because it's a government entity, is impossible. It's just, it's not worth taxpayers' money, but it is for a private entity. So, yeah, I'd like to hear what other.
Great ideas, except that if you still run the numbers, say it was, because it, the construction costs would be less for a private entity.
Right.
But say they're back to the $1.2 million, how is, that's an incredibly high cost per square foot for a private entity that's gonna have a cafe. That the numbers, just we're talking about a very small footprint of the building and the existing septic issues, to make it a viable commercial venture, somebody's gonna, I don't know how the numbers would work that they would make it work either.
Right.
That's the thing. Yeah.
I understand. I mean, and I don't know the details, but talking to, you know, Board of Health and that, yeah, you can put a septic in there, it's, you know, it's like 45,000, but, you know, you've got this, the development, the daily development, they want to put money, they're going to put money in to help restore this too. Why can't you tie into that septic system? I don't know the answers. I don't know the details. I'm too, you know, I haven't researched any of that enough to speak to it, but I think that, you know, somebody that puts the time in, let it be somebody else's time and money that wants to do that. And I think, and you got a lot of vested people in town like Brian Kahn and Robin Scheibel and other people that are builders and that would love to work on that project, that all used to use that building when they could, you know. So it's just a thought, and I don't know if anybody's talked about something like that. I totally get what you're saying. But I think when there's a will, there's a way to do it and do it right. So, and it would be a community project, you know, for with people in the community getting involved in it and people in the community that would use it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, or Kevin, you?
Yeah, because I just really discussed Miller. Well, to reinforce the point, I mean, we spend $1 of bonded money. We are committed all the way for this to be a municipal use. And, you know, we'd be stuck with the whole 2 million and we're not going to do that. So the question is how do we preserve the building? Because municipal use is probably off the table, you know, and we preserve the building by finding a partner, whether it's a commercial entity or a nonprofit entity. And so that's why I asked the question, all right, we need to mothball this thing because, you know, we can't make a decision in the next whatever. Unless, of course, I'm confused about leaving the building the way it is to the winter. I mean, if we can leave the building the way it is to the winter, which we seem to have been doing, then let's leave it. But if we, you know, let's not let this thing get worse. And then my question is, or just to clarify, because we were going to put like $400,000 down, I think, with CPA money, and then bonding the rest.
It was 250 and 1.25 was
Okay, so 250.
Yep.
250 was the. So, and the problem with doing the historical restrictions is that we really, you know, to maintain the national register, I assume, is probably going to create too big of a onus on a commercial person to like use it for, you know, an office. And so we have to find the right, you know, Historic New England or something like that. Or, and then my question is, and even they need to fundraise. So my question is can we, if we're gonna do the restrictions, can we do a grant, a CPA grant to whoever we do a deal with? To either, if it's like Historic New England, they say, oh, okay, you've given us $500,000 and we're gonna commit to raise the rest. But the commercial person that says, hey, you know, I got a soft spot for historic buildings. I'd like to put my law firm in there. But I can't afford that renovation. We said, hey, we'll give you $500,000. So I'm just wondering in my kooky head here, if any of this is, you know, feasible, legal, etc. Thanks. Sure.
As far as the town granting money, I don't think we can do that with public funds, with taxpayer generated funds. I could be wrong, but I don't think.
We give, government gives grants out all the time.
CPA money is used for, the city of Newburyport has churches have received funding for restoration, so it doesn't have to be a municipal.
It may not be commercial, but
Yeah.
certainly nonprofit.
Right, you're right.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting talk. I mean, I kind of was trying to, you know, pencil out a scheme that might work, you know, so.
And I guess my scheme is that we, you know, we've come along with some money to help a third party that might want to.
I mean, it occurred to me, you know, maybe, excuse me, this is second Casey, but, Lynn has something to say. Oh, thanks. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you. I think it's a very interesting comment. The models that I can point to with municipally owned properties that have leased to a nonprofit, who then is leasing their to commercial tenants, I can point to several examples. And in fact, I'm standing in one of them where half of this building is commercial, half of it is nonprofit. But I think the other model that I put into our memo is our properties that are owned by the state through DCR. And they have something called the Historic Curatorship Program, which has been in operation now for over 30 years, leasing state-owned properties to, you know, commercial and private owners who have, well, one is in Bradley Palmer, for instance, you know, the function the function rental that takes place in Bradley Palmer. But I think the point is that when a building has gone as far, quite honestly, as the Carr Center, the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial has in terms of deferred maintenance and care, it is a reach for either the nonprofit or its lessees to actually undertake the full rehabilitation. And if it were possible for some seed money to be invested through CPA to do the turret, for instance, and the basic stabilization, it will make it much more attractive for the nonprofit or the commercial tenant or the commercial renter. The property would still be owned by the town, but it's leased with, you know, restrictions. I also would comment on the matter of restrictions because that was raised earlier in this by another speaker. Again, the buildings that I'm familiar with have all kinds of preservation restrictions on them because of grants received and so on, and they are still able to function as viable entities, generating revenues for their maintenance and care.
Forbes has raised his hand.
Okay, Forbes, please. Forbes, can you hear us? I think he just,
Being like,
oh, there he is.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
He's very hard to hear.
Very soft spoken.
That's right. Might be able to turn this down and just hear it. And there's no other audio. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, Dick.
Dick Cushing, I'm a member of the Legion. And I'm drawn back to the passion, I guess, I felt at annual town meeting when the vote seemed to be pretty soundly in favor of making something happen that's going to, in some ways, relive the dozens and dozens of engagements pre-1899 between then and the American Revolution and so on, and then after 1899. That to many people send a signal that that building is not only about war, but it's about peace. And it's about the struggle to gain peace at the end of the day. Now, really quickly, as a water commissioner, I can say that COVID has caused the water commission to make all sorts of changes based on jobs we had going. That's the reality. I know that Angus and Commander James were at the end of it on at least a weekly basis, trying to get the paperwork through and out into the street, out into the hands of the corporations, and that was a struggle. It was very hard because this, everybody's under the gun on this building to get things done in a timely manner, and they tried to get things out into the hands of the people who needed to see and make decisions to give us reasonable quotes. To get back to the idea of what the building, whatever it looks like, whether it's 5 feet off the ground or whether it's got the tower or whatever. The one person who for years has been interested in maintaining the integrity of military service and the integrity of gaining upper hand on the things that cause us to go to war, and then maintaining peace. To the extent that Commander James, he's got boxes full of handwritten in pencil agreements to the Selective Service or whatever they used to call it, saying, yes, I agree that my son can, or my child, I should say, has my permission to serve, and written in pencil, going back forever. And Commander James would do anything in his power to make sure nothing ever happens to those documents. It's hard to maintain documents at the library, we know. It's difficult. It's hard to maintain records in the basement of this building, and the basement of the old building, old public safety building. So I think it requires at this time to ask Commander James to speak to what, in the simplest terms, the building that's gonna house the histories of war and peace for the citizens of this town. Not has to look like, but what would be enough as a structure to, and I'm thinking it's not probably gonna be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, column. I think it's gonna be a lot simpler than that. And if Bob James can, if you don't mind, Commander, if you could tell us what, does the building need to be square, round, whatever, as long as, what would serve the purposes you envision as a commander of the Legion, as a veteran of the Air Force, when we're in our houses doing our things, and I was waiting for my release mail carrier to help me. Well, I found out, well, oh, geez, that's right. This week, Bob is at the Air National Guard in New Hampshire. He's refueling planes over Guam right now. That's why he's not helping you, Dick. So I thought that was a good trade-off, Bob, because I get a little air sick when I'm flying over the Pacific Ocean. So Bob, if you would recognize the commander.
Certainly, sure.
That we'll get a vision of, how highfalutin this building needs to look, or not. Thanks.
Okay.
My voice is not very loud, so I'm taking off my mask. I'm Elke O'Donnell. I'm in on Daily Drive. I'm very new to the town, but I can assure you when I came, I thought this was a beautiful, very historic building. And then I learned I was wondering why it wasn't renovated or what it was, so I tried to inform myself. I think generally from where I come from, I come actually from Europe. We have many old buildings. So it is a mistake to erase historic buildings. Somebody will regret it because there is a history in it that is not repeatable. And so then during the summer, I learned that, for example, it's one idea. Historic New England has space in Haverhill to refurbish furniture that goes into their historic New England buildings. And I thought to myself, would it be too much to ask to have them come over or somebody come over and give a recommendation? Or would they be interested in helping this to restore this building, because that's what they are in, restoring, preserving buildings, old unique buildings, and might they use it? My concern about anything commercial is it's a question, where's the parking going to be? I mean, anything commercial would need to have parking, and since I don't know, can you park on the street or? So that is another separate question, but please keep the building. And, in whatever shape and form, I hope that it will find a good use.
Bob, you want to speak?
Well, Bob James, done pretty much every community in town, if you will. I think everybody knows my feelings on that building. I feel very strongly that number one, it is a war memorial, and to tear it down and destroy it tells, as far as I'm concerned, the survivors of the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, their families, everything else that can serve us in community. And that's up to and including the people that are, fighting in Afghanistan and everything else. It means to me, it means if you tear it down, that the sacrifices they made means nothing. Now, behind Wendy, there's a whole bunch of stuff that came from the Legion. Some of it dating back to World War I. The library has stuff down there. I think there's 19 boxes of things in the library. There's a second floor. Some of it dates back to the war of 1812, which should be displayed. Most of the stuff that's down there right now in the library is the handwritten records of the meetings of the GAR, Grand Army of the Republic, which was named for, this one here was Isaac Boyd, who was killed about 3 days before the end of the Civil War. He was with the 19th Massachusetts, and he went through every single major battle they had. Antietam, Gettysburg, Cold Harbor, all of them. He got killed in a little skirmish, and actually died of his wounds 3 days before the end of the war. And that post was named for him. There are the handwritten, like Dick said, there are handwritten letters or notes from the fathers of some of these people that went to the Civil War, granting them permission to go. That stuff needs to be, as far as I'm concerned, preserved and displayed. There is no place in town that has the room to display that property except, or that stuff except the Legion Hall. The library has no room. This building has no room. All right, the town hall is not an adequate spot to put it. The Historic Society has absolutely no room. And as far as I'm concerned, to destroy the building leaves that stuff with no place to go. And it's just going to deteriorate. Now, I was surprised, as everybody else, to find out when the bids came in that they were astronomically high. Really. But I really think that we should take whatever we have left and refurbish the building as far as we can go. Now, if somebody like Lynn said, take the torch off, which would save maybe $500,000. As much as I hate to see it, because I think that's one of the defining portions of that building is the torch. But if it means saving the rest of the building, I just don't see the torch taken down. And maybe store the bricks or something so it could be refurbished later. But spend that money to get as much done as we can to preserve that building. All right, and like I said, I would hate to see it torn down because I think it does a great disservice to everybody that wore the uniform.
We have a couple of hands raised, both Elisa and Forbes, it looks like.
Okay, Forbes, we tried before, so why don't we see if it works out? Please. Maybe this audio is more.
Forbes, you could call in through the telephone and use the code that way if the sound isn't working.
Why don't we see if Forbes calls in, and Elisa, maybe you can speak up and
Should I go ahead or should we wait for Forbes?
see if Forbes calls in separately, or we'll try him again when you're done.
Okay. Well, I have some sort of practical and financial concerns about this. I feel like this is a really hard thing. The town voted in 2015 at annual town meeting to spend roughly $100,000 to, quote, stabilize the building and to prevent further deterioration. I'm thinking that must not have worked. If we need to do more just to stabilize it. Another obviously very difficult thing is figuring out what cost estimates should be. And this is a terrible environment, but it's just a really apparently difficult thing to do. So we have tried already to stabilize, and somebody may be able to explain why that didn't work or it only went so far. But we also were looking at very significant costs. And I would say, I believe that the costs are not just the extra $1 million or so. The costs are also the cost of staff resources, of town staff, which are limited, and they have a lot of things to do. And I'm thinking probably they were unable to do a lot of things because they've been dealing with the car post issues. One of the things I'm thinking is that we're hearing a lot of good ideas, and there are a lot of people who are passionate, rightly passionate, supporters of the car post, but they're also, bumping against practical problems. And I would say there needs to be a committee of townspeople who will work on this and figure out, all these good ideas, and then help weed through the practical problems and make a presentation that would be a solution, sort of like Bob said, maybe do away with a tower, and maybe find a partner, or maybe use seed money from CPC. But I really think at this point, trying to get the town staff to sort through a solution is just really hard. And the other thing I would say is I really don't think we can just spend another $1 million and maybe another $1 million. Page School is just devouring CPC money. And we had a great big surprise with the Middle Street Bridge. We really need to think about prioritizing and figuring out what costs are out there and how we're going to handle them. So I would just love to see a really energized, these are really smart people and really hardworking defenders of car post. I would love to see a committee that can make a recommendation to the town and let the town go forward. And I guess I'm still a little bit uncertain about why the $100,000 of mothballing didn't work, but obviously it didn't. So maybe we can move forward in a different way. I don't know.
At least just real quickly to address the $100,000. I think that may actually have been, was that before you moved to West Newbury?
No, it was in 2015. I was there.
Okay. Well, part of what was done was structural reinforcement. Basically the structure didn't have collar ties in it, if I remember right, and the way it's designed, the walls were spreading. There were spreading forces on the walls from roof load. So there were structural elements added to make sure that the structure didn't just fall in on itself. And then there were a variety of other things that were done to regain its weather tightness. Obviously, it was never intended to be a long-term solution. When it was originally done, it was speculated that it would give perhaps 3 years before we had to do something more with the building. It's now been well over 3 years.
Right, it's something was, Rick says 3, I thought maybe 5, but yeah, it wasn't a long-term fix.
Yeah, it was never intended to be, never presented as a long-term fix.
Okay, well that's good to understand.
Yeah.
But it's just a hard problem is my basic point.
Yeah, there's no question about that. That's why we're all here. So I just want to throw out an idea, speaking as an individual, although I happen to be, on the select board, but, so there have been multiple people who have suggested that perhaps the site should be turned into a memorial park, and that the building should be replaced by something else. And so, I've been trying to kind of play with that idea. How could that idea be made palatable to as many people as possible? And, what if something like a quarter scale monument was built? in the image of the existing building as much as possible, using materials from the existing building. It would no longer be a building, and that wouldn't solve the need that Bob mentioned of a place to house, to house historical records, but it would still honor the veterans that originally was intended to, plus not just the ones that it was originally intended to, because of course there've been many since. It was designed and built as a Civil War monument or a Civil War building honoring Civil War veterans. But it could still serve as a monument and a memorial to veterans, and at the same time would be much less expensive than what has been proposed to date, and further would have not zero but near zero ongoing operating costs. It's just an idea. So
to expand on Rick's idea, this afternoon I researched places that have used, and I didn't get far enough to, these are bricks made in the 19th century, some of them, and so they're not, brick making what isn't as good as it is today, and so I don't know their durability, but to repurpose some of the bricks, as Rick said, as a maybe even a walkway or a model or something. But I was also thinking that as a way to memorialize people that wanted to have their somebody that they had a connection to, we could, it could also be a fundraising situation. Is you could laser engrave bricks. Now, whether you can do that with bricks made in 1910, I don't know. I don't know if that would just, their lifespan isn't as, they're not quite as hard. I don't know whether that would work, but that's just another, I was thinking we could really get the community involved. People could for whatever amount of money you want to call it, $100 or $50 or something, they could have their family member on one of the bricks in the walkway or in the model of the building, and that would tie everyone to the building. They feel to the park. They feel more. It'd be part of them, and at the same time, maybe it would be a fundraising thing. Maybe that money could be used to build a place to put the materials. I don't know.
I have a question. One of the options on the floor was to basically do the structural rehabilitation that's required without actually finishing the inside of the building. And so my question is, how close are we to having the funding to do that with the current amount of money that we have? Given that we can't do the entire project. And how much of that part of the project could we do with the money that we have in hand?
So my take on that would be, as Casey, you probably know better than anybody, the CPC, when it recommends a project to town meeting, puts into the motion of the action at town meeting, basically language in substantial conformance with the application submitted. So while the amount of money that was appropriated, which is 1.5 total net of the roughly 122 that's been expended on design so far, would exceed what Lynn's team has estimated it would cost for the structural rehab, about 850. I definitely believe, and I'm sure this is correct, it would need to go back to town meeting because it's a different project than they voted on. So it's not like you could use that existing money without another vote of town meeting.
So, I also have a comment. I disagree with the idea that the building has no purpose. I agree with Mr. James and other people that as just a memorial, it has a purpose. There are memorials all over the place that basically have no purpose. If you look at the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, it can't be used for anything. But I would maintain it has a very distinct purpose. And I think we need to consider those purposes when we think about things like statues that are deteriorating, buildings that are deteriorating. I don't think that a park has the same impact as some sort of structure that has presence as a memorial. So there in itself is a purpose. But I also believe that if we were able to do something to make the inside of the building usable, we would find that there are many groups in town who have to meet in these very uncomfortable spaces, in the annex, in some of the rooms in this building, that aren't very conducive to small groups of people getting together, like the committee that might decide what we would use this building for. I've been a member of a number of committees that sat in very uncomfortable spaces having meetings. We simply don't have small meeting space that's very comfortable. And I think that people would find that it was very useful for that, and other groups would say, oh, I didn't think of that. Sort of like the Field of Dreams, if you build it, they. I would be in favor of doing the best we can to try to preserve the integrity of the building, even if it's just the outside of the building, while doing what Ms. Grammer suggested and having a really serious search about what is the best thing that we could do with that building. And if we had a purpose that we could put down on paper, we could go out for grants. We could do various things. We could explore some of the ideas that Ms. Spencer had about partnering with people. Something. We're not going to do it tonight. We don't have time. But if we don't do anything about the building at this point, then by default we lose it. Because it is crumbling. And it's not going to get any better sitting there. So I think it behooves us to do something. Or just tear it down if that's what we decide we need to do. But to just let it sit there and continue to crumble, to me, isn't an option.
I made a few phone calls today, and I started out with, why don't we tear it down and just rebuild the facade and something more structurally integral. But I was told we cannot take that building. If we take the building down, we cannot.
Who's speaking?
Rich Baker.
Rich Baker, sorry. We cannot put another building there because it's a non-conforming lot. There's no septic. So we either leave that building or take the selectman's idea, which was to put a memorial there. If you do a memorial, would you want to put a columbarium there, which is a place to put ashes of veterans? Basically it's a cemetery with just ashes. You put it in a wall there as a memorial. But so that's just one idea that came up as you were talking. But if we want to keep the building, I keep going back to what I said town meeting, which is to use it for veterans housing. Try to put 3 or 4 studio apartments in there for veterans. It keeps the building for its purpose of serving veterans. There is money out there, and I wasn't able to find it in the couple hours I spent today. But I know there's money out there for veterans housing that we might be able to tap in. I know Home Depot will give up to $500,000 for veterans housing. And I don't know what, that was one that I found in a web search. Now, the problem with that is there's not enough septic space on that property. Now, at one point, they did perk tests for one of the neighbors, and there is additional land behind, I think it's 2 or 3 houses down, and you would have to send the septic down over the Daily Drive property and get in there to put a septic system in.
That is correct, Rick, yes.
And there's also probably possibilities to go underneath Main Street and send it out to the Mullins property, put a septic in there. But that's what you'd need to do to get 3 or 4 bedrooms, which would be 3 or 4 units of housing. But that would give the building a purpose, and it would use it for the purpose that it has of honoring veterans.
Hang on a second there, is Forbes back on? Forbes is there, but he's muted again.
I bet it works this time.
We got you, Forbes.
Yeah, technology's great, isn't it? Actually, the question has gone by, so thanks for being patient with me, but my question's kind of past the moment at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Tom Salvo just put his hand up,
Okay.
but then it went down, so.
Tom Salvo, did you have something, a question?
Hi, yes, I just, one question about mothballing. We were talking about that and Lynn had mentioned that it wouldn't require heating the building perhaps. Is there still standing water in the basement? Does it water still infiltrate it? And would that have an effect on whether it would require heating? Does anybody know?
Wayne, you want to speak to that?
There is some water penetration in the building, not that we haven't had a flood because we keep it up with the pump. If the pump goes down, we have a lot more water, but we do maintain the pump right now. But it is seeing water, it's a dirt floor, and we believe there's a stream that runs underneath it.
So would that freeze perhaps if there were no heat and affect the foundation?
We didn't have heat in the building the first year we closed it, and we just turned the heat on last year. So it went a year or two without heat down there. So it has existed without heat for a winter or 2 or 3.
Okay, I have another question about the funding. We're talking about borrowing this money to do any kind of restoration. And that's based on the fact that we're going to be using CPA funds. What if, for some reason, over the bond life, 20 years or whatever it is, that CPA funds are no longer going to be offered by the state? Who will then have to pay for it, and where will that money come from?
I think, well, if you want to speak up, Angus.
Sure, I can speak to that one. This is Angus Jennings. So we worked with bond counsel on how the financing could be structured. And as I think people know, we're at 3% on the CPA. At any point through town meeting and at the ballot, the town has the option to either rescind or reduce that percentage. Once a town borrows and leverages that future CPC money, that then sets a floor that you cannot reduce your CPC percentage below what you would need to still meet your debt service, because you are pledging the full faith and credit of the town of West Newbury, but you're pledging those future CPC revenues. So basically, if you did a 20-year borrowing, you would be committing the town to maintaining that floor of CPC funding for at least those 20 years.
I think that didn't completely answer Tom's question. Tom was also wondering what would happen if the state discontinued the program.
Oh,
yeah. In that case, the town would continue to be liable.
Right.
I think it's not impossible, Tom, but maybe a stretch to think at this point the state would discontinue that program. There is a funding source, an ongoing funding source for the program.
That's true, but another point is the borrowing model that you saw as part of the CPC application, or that you may have seen, does not factor in the state match in terms of projecting the amount of CPC funds. It does not, because the bond counsel are very conservative and they're not assuming that there's going to be any state match, even though in reality there is.
Thank you. I had another couple of comments or questions I could say. I think that leasing the property would probably be a very difficult thing to do, based on what a woman said earlier, that there is no parking, and that what several people have mentioned, the septic priorities are not adequate to make it very useful. The buildings that Lynn referred to that were refurbished in other towns, I doubt very much that they were as small as 2,400 square feet, especially if they housed nonprofit in addition to commercial properties. And I know that the two that she mentioned, the the Buckman Tavern in Lexington and the Tilden House in Canton are actual buildings that existed during the Civil War. And all due respect to all those people who have an attachment to this building, this was a monument. It was not a building that was used in the Civil War. It was a building that was put up as a monument to the people that lost their lives in the Civil War. And I think that if we were to do a park and create some type of monument, whether it be a small quarter size building or just a big stone with a very detailed image of the building on it. This is also a monument to those people. It's not like it was the building itself that those people lived in or discussed policies in or anything like that. And it just came to my mind now while Lisa was talking, we're rebuilding that bridge. Why couldn't we name that bridge in honor of them as well? So those are just some things that I wanted to throw out there, but I do agree with the idea of making another monument that is going to be less costly and require less ongoing costs. So somebody had written about that before, and Rick Parker mentioned it now, and I just want to say I'm fully in support of that. Thank you.
I just wanted to, one statement I wanted to make, since it has been brought up twice tonight about the comment that there's no parking. I would want to point out that the design scheme had a parking lot kind of in the back of the building for 8 cars, including a handicap parking space. So there was parking intended for the site.
Thanks, Doug. Steve, do you want to say something?
It's not why I walked up here, but yeah. I think that Angus.
Could you, just so other people know, could you identify yourself, please?
Well, my name's Steve Swallow. I live in River Road in town.
Great, thanks.
Angus mentioned that we have, I think, I want him to correct me, 1.025 million with the bonds.
So the appropriation was for a total 1.5, 250 was kind of out up front, and then 1.25 is the borrowing authorization that's on the books today. Okay. Yes.
Now I'd like Lynn Spencer to be listening to this. 2 very important points were made by the commander and the moderator. And I know that the commander and moderator, because I know the moderator, agree that the archives of our library are full of precious, precious, precious material that nobody will ever see unless there is a way to have evolving and rotating displays somewhere in town. The other point is what I need Lynn and Doug for, because if we have that much money, and the bids came to 2 million, I guess 2 million, 2.1. Yeah. Lynn, could you get that building, including the tower, buttoned up? I mean, in shape on the outside with a little landscaping and looking real good for the amount of money we have?
Am I responding on that? So the item 2 in the memo that I drafted with Doug addressed suggested $850,000 for the rebuilding and rebuilding the turret and repointing the exterior of the building, providing a roof over the turret as well as the rear entry canopy, did window, doors, and trim repairs, exterior painting, installed the flowable fill in the basement, and rebuilt the first floor framing, and did a modest amount of landscaping in addition to what the cottage advisors have agreed to do for the town. They were the ones that were putting in the parking lot and pathways and some screening. So we derived that number, $850,000, from looking at the bids that actually came in. So I would say that, you know, you have $250,000 that is not bonded, but you would in addition need to have additional monies, which, as Angus has pointed out, would mean returning to the town meeting to redraft that article. And that would actually get the building in good shape.
I think the answer I heard to Steve's question was yes. Is that right, Lynn?
That is the answer, but I wanted the public to hear what was in that estimate, because not everyone would have had the chance to read it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody else with any other comments or questions? No, Brian?
Does CPC or CPA money have to go toward prevailing wage in the bid law?
Yeah. If it's a municipal purpose, that's.
Because I'll do that for 1.2, the whole building.
I'm driving you home.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can't cut that deal.
I know that.
It's tempting, Brian.
Okay. The last thing, you know, my recommendation is, I don't recommend anything. Listen, my thoughts are that we have Lynn and Doug figure out as much that is structurally and to make that building sound, so that we're gonna finish it someday. We're gonna have to. And the other point I'm forgetting, it's good. The other thing goes back to Elisa Grammer. It came back. Elisa suggested that we form a committee of people with passion. Boy, they're all over town. Actually, when our chairman, Rick Parker, said it was a close vote, it was a very close vote. It only won by one vote, but it was a 2/3 majority. This town is passionate about that building. It wasn't 51%, it was 67%. And if we put Elisa and Bob and Casey on a committee, along with Archie and Wendy, who's grinning at me, okay, we've got a solution. And let's spend the money right now and make that building everything we can make it. When we run out, we stop. But it's got to be buttoned up and it's got to look good.
And as long as it meets the requirements of the Legion, insofar as the Legion is the caretaker of certain resources, records, and so on. I see a lot of sense in what Steve was saying.
Yeah. You know, I personally have concerns about a committee that's comprised entirely of people who have already decided what ought to happen. And we don't have adequate funds to carry through with the plan that was originally anticipated. So, you know, my personal thought is we need to take a step back and think about all options without going in with completely set preconceived notions as to what ought to happen. And no offense to anybody, but the passionate people already have set preconceived notions of what ought to be done going forward. And that there's a community of 4,500 people, and the people who weigh in on decisions and what path to take to town meeting because this would ultimately require some town meeting action, needs to be comprised of people with different perspectives, with a broad range of perspectives. Steve, your question.
Just a point, at the meeting 2 years ago, when the money was appropriated, there was no agreement at that time on what the building would be used for, and it passed anyway. Okay, the other thing is, yes, I gave a passionate little speech, if you will. That doesn't mean that whatever committee's formed should be a broad-based committee of the town. I don't vision the committee having just passionate people on it.
I will say, Rick, if we do have a committee, Kevin Bowe from Maple Street, if we do have a committee, indeed, the committee's purpose should be to preserve that building, because that is what 2/3 of the town meeting wanted to do. And it was voted a second time to support it. So while I don't know if we can save the building, I think we need a committee that should have a purpose of preserving that building, because that clearly is the will of the town meeting in the town. So I certainly respect the need to have it as a memorial, but I have a question on who's going to pay for tearing that building down, removing it, and building this memorial? Because as I understand it, CPC won't pay a cent of that. And so any discussion about other alternatives is on a different ledger on the taxpayers. And it's a ledger that will increase your taxes. The work we're doing with CPC, everyone needs to understand, is not going to impact your taxes because it's 3%. It's fixed. So, we either spend CPC on what it's for, historical preservation, or we spend town funds on everything else. Thank you.
So I think we probably need to talk as a board a little bit. I think we've heard a lot of ideas, and I don't see anybody else raising their hand at this point. So, Angus?
This is mundane, but I just want to make sure that you remember that, and I know that you do, that the questions are on the table regarding the commitment of the developer for Drake's Landing. And I don't want to go sideways now, but before the meeting is done, I do want to, and just a question for everybody. So people may know back in 2017, when the project was being permitted, the developer had agreed to make certain site improvements, namely the parking in the rear, the removal of the curb cuts in the front, and restoring that with loam and seed, some plantings. And so now that project's in the very late stages. The developers notified us fairly recently. His crew is going to be on site in the next couple of weeks. And so he said, he's prepared to go and do these things, and the board controls the property. So I do need to let him know, does he go ahead and do those things or not?
Okay.
And so just to be specific, so that would be paving the rear parking lot, which currently has a sub base, removing all of the pavement from the front yard. That would include the 2 curb cuts off Main Street, replacing that with 6-inch loam and seed. And the removal of those curb cuts was a condition of the Mass DOT curb cut permit for Daily Drive. And then there were some additional things like walkways and things, and we're not getting into that. So if there's a cost delta between what I've just outlined and the dollar value of what he had agreed, the discussion has been, though nothing's finalized, it would be up to this board and him, that he, could contribute that delta into a car post gift account.
Yeah, okay.
So anyhow, I just want to make sure we don't adjourn tonight before.
Right, no, thank you. And actually, so maybe we talk about maybe we can just get it. Actually, let's stay on this topic, and then I do have a question for Wayne about that. But so Wendy or Archie, you have any thoughts on a committee?
There's so much information. I really have to. I'm not passing the buck. I just have to think about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So I guess my question is, how would this be different from the original purpose?
That's probably one of the first questions we need to settle on. I mean, you know, one side of me says things haven't changed, and the other one says that they've changed dramatically because we've had numbers come back that were so far in excess of you know what was approved, and I'm guessing probably exceed anything that the town would stomach at this point in time.
So we would have to define the mission, you know, and then think about who should be in.
Right, right. And with all due respect to what Kevin said, I want to confirm that was in fact the case. And understand, and I would hope that a committee would understand fully what options there are. I'm concerned about putting 850,000 or $1.25 million or anything in between into a structure where we really don't have a clue when and if we'll be able to do anything further with it. And in the process of doing that, end up with what seems to be a buttoned up envelope for the structure, but zero use for the funds committee. You know, in return for the funds committee.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask
Sure,
Angus
please.
a question? And Angus, so have we used any of the so this is clear to people, so have we used any of the potential borrowing amount of at this point? Now we just use the part that we voted from CPC cash. correct?
That's correct. We have not done any borrowing whatsoever.
And in fact, there's something left in that cash.
Yeah, of the,
50,000.
no, it's more than that. It's about 100. So what's been incurred since the town meeting vote is just short of 128, 128,000. So there's just a little over 122,000 left of that initial appropriation.
Okay. And then there's some funds, 16,000, 16,500, something like that, that came in as gift.
Yeah, most of that was spent. The remaining balance in the gift account is just over $2,000.
Thanks. So, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes?
Sorry. I have a suggestion to make for your committee. I'm all for a committee. You might decide not to have one, but it could have two purposes. I hear that there are somewhere historical documents that are of great value. So that could be one subject. Can anybody organize or tap sources, find out information? Who would preserve these documents? I'm sure there are millions of people out there who would like to do that. Number one. The other should be finding out who would come and look at the building from, let's say, a historic society or, you know, you name it, just finding out about possible resources. I doubt that any one of us, maybe I'm wrong, but any one of us could just go and say, oh, I have an idea. We need to spend that much money, this much, and then it will be used for that. We don't really know, but we could find out, are there possible entities interested and what would they propose? The other, where are all these documents? I think they're incredible. And ought to be, I mean, somebody ought to be notified that they are there and they could go over it, and it's precious history. Once they're gone, they're gone. And then to the Drake's Landing, I'm all for it. Just, I mean, it's, why not spend that money and get that done now? It's an important step also for Main Street, for the side. I mean, I live on Daily Drive, I see that too, that they offered it and it shouldn't go to waste. Just like that, because we can't decide what we're going to do with it. So it would be a suggestion primarily for the committee to think large and to go out and perhaps divide it in 2 or 3 entities, you know. I mean, historical documents, building, use, something like that.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Can I ask Wayne a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Wayne, in terms of the specifics of the parking, so we didn't want to finish that and the landscaping, obviously in the anticipation that there would be construction and that would be ruining the parking that we do. But so now we're in the situation, so is there some way to protect the parking so that if construction did take place a 1.5 years from now, that contractors could use that area as a staging area without ruining the hot topic? Is that's my question.
So the
Can
longer
you put something over that?
The longer we wait, the better we'll hold up. So if we paved it next month and we did construction the month after, bad, because we just did the asphalt's the
Right.
If you let it sit for 1 year or 2, the asphalt's got to harden up, so it'll be like regular parking. It will see some wear and tear during the construction, but it should hold up pretty well.
Okay.
In reality, the worst case is you put a little 1-inch overlay when you're all done. Instead of doing a base coat,
Okay.
2 inches and another 2. But I mean, it's going to be 1.5 years sitting there, hardened up over the weather conditions that, you know, if they're putting material on it, it shouldn't damage it. I mean, it's going to be asphalt. It's the hardest surface you put it on.
So Wayne, my understanding was that there was an alternative, cash equivalent, cash value offer from Drake's Landing developer, that was available to the town to take as opposed to them doing the work. And it would allow us the latitude of whatever is done there doesn't damage what's already there. And that included, I think, the work in the front. Would it make sense for us to consider doing that? The developer may get a better price based on the amount of other work he has being done by whoever is going to do that work. But would it make any sense from looking at it from the standpoint of the DPW director, would it make any sense for us to take advantage of that, and reserve those funds for the purpose of finishing up around the building, whatever ultimately happens?
It's a great question. He's going to pay it for probably 2/3 of the cost of the base flood.
Yeah.
If we're going to pay for family wage, I think that's
Yeah.
our favorite thing. And it could be a little bit more than that, we get to do the asphalt, they get the asphalt adjustment based on the price of oil. So they get to raise the asphalt price based on the economy.
Yeah.
When we bid it. And so
Yeah.
a contractor does not, if he can get the lowest bidder, call 3 guys, negotiate something, have it done, he's doing something else. So the price that he's going to give us to pave that lot, say it's $13,000, it would probably cost us $22,000 to pave it.
Okay.
In the long run.
Okay.
In the future.
Okay.
I mean, would it be better for them not to pave it and leave it alone? Yes, because the parking lot's not going to be the exact place that we're probably going to want to put it in the future.
Yeah.
But saying that, if we're talking about construction 3 or 4 years from now, 2 or 3 years from now, I don't know what's going to happen next year. To actually bid it in, whatever we decide on the bid, go through the process and so over again. We're probably going to look at 1 year or 2. At that time, we always cut and fix the parking lot so it fits in our right place, fill in a couple areas that we didn't pave, cut the areas that we did pave, and then put a little overlay on it. So they could pave it. We have somewhere to push snow, and Drake's Land is interested in parking there, so serve them for purposes. So I have no problem either way we go.
Yeah,
We're not gonna win on either case, gonna have to adjustment if they pay now, or we're gonna get less money if they give us a check.
Yeah.
So.
We have to fix the front though, don't we, by DOT from
Yes,
DOT?
yes,
Yeah.
so that has to be done now.
yeah, which is little,
Yeah.
thousands.
Yeah.
Thousands, I mean, it's a day's worth of work, and it's gonna cost more to throw the stuff away than the actual labor.
Yeah,
So,
okay. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, one of the concerns that was talked about, and I don't recall this is back, because I was on the CPC at the point that we were talking about this. You know, when the CPC voted on it, and it was either there or maybe it was in subsequent conversation that there was the thought that it was better to have the existing pavement out front. And I understand that may not be an option now, but it was advantageous if they were gonna be working on the building to actually have the existing pavement on the front of the building.
it's in such bad shape, it's not doing anything for you. There's
Yeah.
big chunks coming up,
Okay,
and every
okay.
winter we go in there and plow it. because
okay,
it wants to
okay,
plow.
so if that was the case, it's no longer the case,
It's
so
not
it would be, okay. Thanks. Well, I guess maybe getting to the point that Angus brought up, maybe we should just decide on what we think we're gonna do as far as the, having cottage advisors go ahead or not. And, anybody want to make a motion? Do you have a thought, or do you want, why don't we make a motion?
We'll make a motion because we're gonna talk about it.
Right, yeah,
I'll make a motion to authorize code advisors to carry out work that was detailed previously.
okay. Discussion.
I don't know what that's.
Okay, okay. I mean, it seems to me, based on what Wayne just said, as though it makes sense to go ahead and get that done. You know, if we wanted the parking lot to be slightly different at a later point in time, I don't know if we can maintain the integrity of the edges and do that or not, but the point is, we don't have a clue what that's gonna be. And based on what Wayne is saying, we're gonna lose significant value, or we're gonna increase costs substantially, it's probably a better way to rephrase that, if we don't have cottage advisors go ahead with their work. So we probably get substantially more out of it, with some risk of it not being exactly what we want to have cottage advisors.
And in the interim, it'll look nicer there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. In the correspondences that not just my office, but Wayne and the town planner have had with the immediate neighbors, I do believe that they will be pleased to lot paved. And I know we have one of those neighbors here who I think expressed the same thing, so.
Great. Okay, well, as far as what to do going forward, I know RG wanted to sort of think about this a bit. It's probably not a bad idea for all of us to do that. We got a lot of input, a lot of good input. But I think we might wait a meeting cycle or two before deciding. I mean, things aren't gonna change in the next 2 weeks or 4 weeks, I don't think.
Can I ask you one last question?
Sure, please.
You said that you had an advisory committee that was, I'm unaware of. Did you actually have any veterans, military veterans on that committee?
Yes.
That had access to and understood what kind of free money they can get, having been working through the system. And that had a general interest in restoring that building. Because there are a lot of great ways to incorporate all the historical documents into that building to make it a useful building. And there's money out there, the VA has a ton of money.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you had any veterans.
Well, yeah, we did actually. In fact, Bob James was on that committee, and Bob, I don't remember. I mean, it's only 2 years ago, and you think I remember more. But I don't recall all of us who were on the committee at that point.
It was Marley Switzer, Peter Ringenbach, Rick Atwater, and Bob.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So, yeah, that was the membership. So, you know, there was definitely representation of veterans.
Yeah, we're still affiliated with the VA.
Yeah.
So, you know, up to date on what's going on with the VA. and what they're giving out different projects and such. So. We research current stuff.
Committee member. Committee member.
There's a lot of possibilities that I'm not gonna sit here and talk about all night, but that, you know, because I'm looking at what benefits the town for the lowest cost amount of money. $2 million isn't the right thing to do. Nobody, that's just ridiculous. But there's a lot of alternatives that are definitely doable. And I think there's money out there to be had to help with that project. I think that, yeah, there's a lot of great historical documents that can be incorporated, whether, even if you know, it's not like I'm against a memorial or anything like that either. There's a proper way to do that. And, you know, with these documents being displayed, we do have a historical society in town that should be taking interest in some of this. Why they haven't, I don't know. But back to, if you had something like a cafe there, that would be the theme of the whole cafe. It would be, you know, it's a memorial really, and that the walls are decorated with all the stories and the documents. You could have, this could be, talk about getting the community involved. You could make it part of the elementary and high school, grade school projects on history projects, you know.
You're finding yourself a job on the committee.
You know, have a student adopt a soldier, you know, and write about its great history to get to know their own stuff that's going on in town. You can have a family, you know, fundraising on it, on adopting a soldier from it, and represent, you know, this is all World War II stuff that I'm familiar with. It's like, you know, they can adopt a soldier and pay for and sponsor, you know, a portion to put their story up on the walls. There's all kinds of great stuff to support the races. $2 million is just ridiculous. I think it needs to get out of the government hands and get it into the private hands of people, you know, the local people that will want to do it, you know, do it right, do it at a reasonable price, and make it useful to the community. I'm not against the memorial, but it wouldn't be useful to the community. I mean, we need a meeting place that we can all sit down, have a meeting, have a coffee, whether it be school teachers or whatever, but the point is that it would serve the community.
Yeah, I doubt there's a person here or listening in that would disagree that it would be wonderful to have a cafe where you can go sit down with a cup of coffee with other people, have a sandwich or a pastry or something, and you know, maybe there's office space up above. But the question is, how do we get from here to there?
It's possible. It's just too many people involved. Yeah. But it's the important thing is keeping the integrity of what that building and the history about it is all about. And it would be a great history project for all the kids, students involved in town, and people to get to know, especially that are new or whatever, get to know really what the, you know, town's about, you know, the history of the people that were here and that. So there's lots of possibilities. I think it's been limited up until now for, you know, maybe up. I mean, I don't usually get 29 years of living here. It's the first town meetings I've attended. So I don't usually pay attention or get involved in it, but you know, this was a little bit different. So yeah, I'll volunteer for a committee.
Okay, thank you. This, I think we're set for now. Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody, for your input. This is obviously not going to be, whatever we do, this is going to be some work and not an easy decision. I think that's it on the agenda now, so we adjourn.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.